The last fiddle note hung in the air like gun smoke after a duel, and Clara Owens stood alone beside the punch bowl, watching the other young women of Calico, California file out of the schoolhouse on the arms of their beaux or fathers. She should not have come. She knew that before she even left the boarding house where she worked scrubbing floors and changing linens for $2 a week. But Mrs. Henderson had insisted, practically shoving Clara out the door with a stern lecture about how a woman of 22 had no business hiding away from life, just because her circumstances were unfortunate. The year was 1883, and Calico was a silver mining town that had exploded from nothing into a bustling community of over 1,000 souls in just a few short years. The boom had brought prosperity, chaos, and all manner of people chasing dreams of striking it rich. Clara had come west not for silver but for escape, running from a scandal in Missouri that was not even of her making. Her older sister had run off with a married man, and the shame had painted their entire family. When both her parents succumbed to influenza within a month of each other, Clara had taken what little money remained and bought a ticket as far west as her funds would carry her. She set down the tin cup she had been clutching and reached for her shawl, a threadbare thing that had belonged to her mother. The evening had grown cold, as desert nights always did, and she could see her breath misting in the lamplight. "Pardon me, miss." The voice came from behind her, deep and uncertain. Clara turned to find a man standing in the doorway, hat in his hands, looking at her with an expression that seemed equal parts hopeful and terrified. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that spoke of hard physical labor. His face was weathered by sun and wind, lines creasing around his eyes and mouth. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, though the hardness of frontier life could age a man prematurely. "May I have this one?" he asked, his voice rough as if unused to speaking much. "The dance, I mean." "If there is to be another." Clara glanced around the empty room. The musicians had already packed their instruments. The tables had been pushed back against the walls. "I think the dance is over, sir." "Oh." He looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "I see." She should have left it at that. Should have gathered her things and walked back to the boarding house and forgotten this entire disappointing evening. But something in his face stopped her. Not pity exactly. Recognition, perhaps. The look of someone else who knew what it meant to be alone. "Were you coming to meet someone?" she asked. He shook his head. "No, miss, I saw the lights from the road. I do not come into town often. My ranch is about 8 miles north. I was delivering some horses to the livery when I heard the music." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. "I have not been to a dance in over 3 years." "I see." Clara found herself curious despite her better judgment. "Why tonight, then?" A faint color rose in his sun-darkened cheeks. "Truth be told, I have been sitting on my horse outside for near an hour, trying to work up the nerve to come in. By the time I managed it, I suppose I waited too long." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something kindle in his dark eyes. "Though maybe not entirely too long if you are still here." Clara felt heat rise to her own face. "I am afraid I am not much of a prize for your waiting, Mr. Thorne, Thomas Thorne, and I did not mean any disrespect, Miss Owens, Clara Owens, Miss Owens." He nodded respectfully. "I only meant that I am glad to have met you, even if the dancing is done." They stood there in awkward silence for a moment, and Clara wondered what she must look like to him. Her dress was clean but old, let out and taken in so many times that the seams were beginning to show wear. Her dark hair, which had started the evening in a neat arrangement, now hung in loose waves around her shoulders. She was not beautiful, she knew. Pleasant enough to look at, perhaps, but nothing that would make a man ride 8 miles into town. "I could walk you home," Thomas offered suddenly. "If that would not be too forward." It is dark, and a lady should not be walking alone. Clara knew she should refuse. She knew nothing about this man except that he owned a ranch and had apparently spent an hour mustering courage to attend a dance. For all she knew, he could be dangerous. But something in his eyes, a loneliness that matched her own, made her nod. "That would be kind of you, Mr. Thorne. I am staying at the Henderson boarding house, just down Main Street." His face lit up with such genuine pleasure that Clara felt something warm unfurl in her chest. "I would be honored, Miss Owens." He offered his arm, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. They stepped out into the night air, and Clara was immediately grateful for his presence. The streets of Calico were never entirely safe after dark, especially for a woman alone. Miners came down from the hills with pockets full of silver and heads full of whiskey, looking for entertainment. The saloons were in full swing, piano music and raucous laughter spilling out onto the wooden sidewalks. "Have you been in Calico long?" Thomas asked as they walked. "6 months," Clara replied. "I came from Missouri after my parents passed." "I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you, and you? Are you from California originally?" He shook his head. "Texas originally. I came out here 5 years ago with my brother, meaning to try our hand at mining like everyone else. But we quickly realized we knew more about cattle and horses than we did about digging holes in the ground. We pooled what money we had and bought a small plot of land north of town. Built it up from nothing." Clara noted his use of the past tense. "Your brother is no longer with you." Thomas's jaw tightened. "He died 2 years ago, rattlesnake bite. He was moving some rocks to clear a new field and did not see it until too late. He was gone before I could even get him to a doctor." "I am so sorry." "Life out here is hard," Thomas said simply. "You learn to keep going or you give up and go home, and I had no home to go back to." They walked in silence for a while, the sounds of the town washing over them. Clara found herself very aware of the solid warmth of his arm beneath her hand, the steady rhythm of his gait. When they reached the boarding house, she was surprised to find herself reluctant to let go. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. Thorne," she said, stepping back. "Thomas, please." He looked at her intently. "Miss Owens, I know this is forward and you have no reason to say yes, but would you consider allowing me to call on you? Properly, I mean. Perhaps next Sunday, if you have the afternoon free." Clara's heart began to beat faster. No one had courted her, not ever. There had been a boy back in Missouri, before the scandal, who had seemed interested. But once the gossip started, he had disappeared as quickly as morning dew. She had resigned herself to spinsterhood, to a life of scrubbing other people's floors and sleeping in other people's houses. "I work Sundays," she said, and saw his face fall. She hurried to continue. "But I have Wednesday afternoons free. Mrs. Henderson closes the boarding house to new guests on Wednesdays for cleaning, and she does not require my help then." Thomas's smile could have lit up the entire street. "Wednesday then. I could bring a picnic if you would like. There is a nice spot by the creek about a mile outside of town, trees for shade, and it is peaceful." "That sounds lovely." 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock, Clara confirmed. Thomas put his hat back on, tipping it to her. "Good night, Miss Owens. I look forward to Wednesday." "Good night, Thomas." Clara watched him walk back down the street toward the livery where he must have stabled his horse. Only when he had disappeared around the corner did she turn and slip inside the boarding house, her heart doing strange things in her chest. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the parlor, pretending to read but clearly having waited up. She was a widow of 50, stern-faced but kind-hearted, who had taken Clara in when she had first arrived in town with almost no money and no prospects. "Well," the older woman demanded, "did you have a pleasant time?" "I met someone," Clara said softly. Mrs. Henderson set down her book. "Did you now? Anyone I know?" Thomas Thorne. He has a ranch north of town. Thorne. Mrs. Henderson frowned thoughtfully. I have heard the name. He comes into town rarely, but when he does, people speak well of him. Honest, hardworking, lost his brother a while back, if I remember correctly. Has been running that ranch alone ever since. She studied Clara's face. He made an impression, did he? Clara felt herself blushing. He asked to call on me Wednesday afternoon, and you said yes. I did. Mrs. Henderson nodded approvingly. Good. You deserve some happiness, Clara. You have worked hard and kept your head down and never complained. It is about time something good came your way. The days until Wednesday crawled by with agonizing slowness. Clara threw herself into her work, scrubbing floors until they gleamed, beating rugs until not a speck of dust remained, changing linens with military precision. But no amount of labor could stop her mind from wandering to Thomas Thorne and his quiet smile. Wednesday morning dawned clear and warm, promising a beautiful afternoon. Clara could hardly eat breakfast, her stomach tied in knots of anticipation and nervousness. She changed her dress 3 times before settling on her best one, a simple blue calico that brought out her eyes. Mrs. Henderson helped her arrange her hair, pinning it up in a style more elaborate than Clara usually wore. You look lovely, the older woman said, patting her shoulder. Now stop fretting. The man already asked you out. He clearly wants to spend time with you. But what if we have nothing to talk about? What if he realizes I am dreadfully boring? Then he will not come calling again, and you will be no worse off than you were before. But I suspect you are worrying over nothing. Now go wait in the parlor before you wear a hole in my good rug with your pacing. Thomas arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, riding a handsome bay mare and leading a gentle-looking sorrel. He had cleaned up from their first meeting, his shirt pressed and his face freshly shaved. When Clara stepped out onto the porch, his expression made her feel like the most beautiful woman in California. Miss Owens, he said, dismounting and removing his hat. You look lovely. Thank you, and thank you for bringing a horse for me. That was very thoughtful. I figured it was too far to walk in this heat. This is Rosie. She is as gentle as they come. Is it all right? Can you ride? Clara had to smile. I grew up on a farm in Missouri, Mr. Thorne. I have been riding since I was 6 years old. His relief was palpable. Thomas, please. And I am glad to hear it. I was worried I had assumed too much. The ride out of town was pleasant, the afternoon sun warm but not oppressive. Thomas led them north, away from the mining operations and into a landscape of desert scrub and scattered Joshua trees. After about a mile, Clara heard the sound of running water, and they emerged into a small oasis where a creek wound between cottonwood trees. It is beautiful, Clara said, dismounting. How did you find this place? My brother and I camped here the first night we arrived in the area, before we knew where we wanted to settle. We had been traveling for weeks, sleeping on hard ground, eating nothing but jerky and hardtack. This felt like paradise. Thomas tied the horses in the shade and began unpacking a basket from behind his saddle. I try to come here when I need to think. It reminds me of why I stayed. They spread a blanket under the trees, and Clara was impressed by the spread Thomas had brought. Fresh bread, cheese, cold chicken, apples, and even a small jar of preserves. It was more food than Clara usually saw in a week. This is wonderful, she said. Did you prepare all this yourself? Thomas looked a bit embarrassed. I admit I had some help. There is a woman, Mrs. Chen, whose husband works one of the smaller claims. She sometimes does washing and cooking for the ranchers in the area. I hired her to help me put this together. I am not much of a cook beyond basic trail food. They settled down to eat, and the initial awkwardness began to fade as they talked. Thomas asked about her life in Missouri, and Clara found herself telling him things she had not spoken of in months. The farm where she grew up, her father's skill with horses, her mother's garden that had produced the most magnificent roses. She told him about the scandal too, though it pained her, feeling he deserved to know the truth. "It was not even our fault," she said, staring down at her hands. "My sister Margaret was always headstrong, always dreaming of something more than what we had." When Jacob Miller started paying attention to her, she was flattered. He was older, successful, charming. She did not know he had a wife back east, or maybe she knew and did not care. I am still not sure which would be worse. Thomas listened without judgment, his dark eyes steady on her face. When the truth came out when his wife arrived in town looking for him, it destroyed both families. My parents were good people, but the shame of it broke something in them. They stopped going to church, stopped seeing friends. When the influenza came through town that winter, I think they just did not have the will to fight it. Clara wiped at her eyes angrily. "I am sorry. This is hardly cheerful conversation for a picnic." "Do not apologize," Thomas said gently. "We all carry burdens, Clara. May I call you Clara?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. "My family was not much better, truth be told. My father drank himself to death when I was 15. My mother followed a year later from what the doctor called a broken heart, but I think it was really just exhaustion. She had been holding our family together for so long, and when my father finally died, she just had nothing left. My brother Nathan was all I had left. We took what little remained and headed west, figuring we could not do much worse than we had done back home." "And did you? Do better, I mean." Thomas was quiet for a moment, looking out at the creek. "In some ways. We built something here, Nathan and I. The ranch may not be much, but it is ours. We worked for every inch of it. That meant something." He turned back to her. "But in other ways, I think I have been just surviving rather than living. Working dawn to dusk, falling into bed exhausted, waking up to do it all again. I have been telling myself it was enough, that building the ranch was all that mattered." "What changed?" Clara asked softly. He met her eyes. "I saw you standing there in that schoolhouse, all alone but holding your head up high, looking like you had every right to be there, even though everyone else had already gone. And I thought, that is a woman who understands, who knows what it means to keep going even when things are hard." I had been sitting on that horse outside, listening to the music and telling myself I was too tired, too dirty, too much of a rough rancher to go inside. But when I saw you, something just pushed me through that door. Clara felt tears prick her eyes again, but for a different reason this time. "I almost did not go to the dance at all. Mrs. Henderson had to practically force me out the door. I kept thinking, what is the point? No one will want to dance with the scandal-tainted girl from Missouri who scrubs floors for a living." "Then I am grateful to Mrs. Henderson," Thomas said. "And I am grateful you listened to her." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the creek babble over the rocks. Clara felt something shifting inside her, walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. "Tell me about your ranch," she said, wanting to know everything about him. Thomas's face animated as he talked. The ranch covered 200 acres, with a small herd of cattle and a larger operation breeding and training horses. He had contracts with the Army and several of the larger mining operations to provide working animals. It was hard work, but profitable enough to keep him going and even expand bit by bit. "The house is not much," he admitted. "Nathan and I built it ourselves, and we were better with horses than with carpentry. It is sturdy and it keeps the weather out, but it is pretty rough. I always thought that someday I would fix it up, make it more comfortable. But when Nathan died, I just lost the heart for it. Seemed pointless for just one person." "I would like to see it sometime," Clara said, "if that would be appropriate." "I would like that very much. Perhaps next week. I could pick you up after church on Sunday, bring you out for dinner. Nothing fancy, but I can manage a decent roast." "I would enjoy that." They stayed by the creek until the shadows grew long, talking about everything and nothing. Thomas told her about the challenges of ranching in the desert, the constant worry about water and predators. Clara told him about the eccentric guests at the boarding house, making him laugh with her descriptions of the prospector who insisted on keeping his ore samples in his room, much to Mrs. Henderson's dismay. When Thomas finally rode her back to town, Clara felt like she had known him far longer than a few hours. There was an ease between them that surprised her, a comfort that felt natural rather than forced. "Thank you for a wonderful afternoon," she said as they stopped in front of the boarding house. "Thank you for saying yes." Thomas helped her dismount, his hands steady on her waist. For a moment they stood very close and Clara thought he might kiss her, but he simply smiled and stepped back. "I will see you Sunday then, after church. I will be waiting." Clara watched him ride away, her heart full in a way it had not been in longer than she could remember. Mrs. Henderson was waiting in the parlor again, not even pretending to read this time. "Well," she demanded. Clara sat down beside her, a smile spreading across her face. It was perfect. The days between that Wednesday and Sunday felt both endless and far too short. Clara went about her work in a daze, catching herself smiling at odd moments. The other boarders noticed the change in her, commenting on her improved spirits. Even Mr. Patterson, a grumpy prospector who never had a kind word for anyone, remarked that she looked downright cheerful. Sunday arrived clear and bright. Clara wore her best dress again, the blue calico, and spent extra time on her hair. She sat through the church service, barely hearing a word of the sermon, her attention fixed on the door, watching for Thomas's arrival. He came in late, slipping into a back pew just as the congregation stood to sing a hymn. Clara turned and caught his eye, and the smile he gave her made her heart skip. After the service, he waited for her outside, hat in hand. "Miss Owens," he said formally, mindful of the other churchgoers filing past. "I was hoping you might still be available for that dinner I mentioned." "I am, Mr. Thorne. I would be delighted." They rode north again, but this time they continued past the creek, into terrain that grew gradually greener as they climbed in elevation. After about an hour they crested a rise and Clara saw Thomas's ranch spread out below them. He had been too modest in his description. The house was indeed simple, a single-story structure of wood and stone, but it was well maintained and fit the landscape perfectly. Behind it stood a good-sized barn and a series of corrals where horses grazed peacefully. The whole property was nestled in a valley where a spring provided year-round water, creating a pocket of green in the desert landscape. "It is beautiful," Clara breathed. "It is home," Thomas said simply. "Or at least, it is trying to be." He helped her dismount and led her into the house. The interior was as rough as he had warned, but it was clean and orderly. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all in one. A stone fireplace dominated one wall. Simple furniture, clearly handmade, was arranged practically but with little thought to comfort or decoration. 2 doors led off the main room, presumably to bedrooms. "I know it is not much," Thomas said, suddenly looking uncertain. "I've gotten used to it, but seeing it through your eyes, I realize how bare it must look." Clara walked slowly around the room, taking it all in. "It looks like a place where someone works very hard and falls into bed exhausted at the end of the day. A place that is waiting to become a home rather than just a house." "That is exactly what it is," Thomas said quietly. He insisted she sit while he prepared dinner, refusing her offers of help. Clara watched as he moved efficiently around the kitchen, clearly a man used to doing for himself. The roast he had mentioned turned out to be beef with potatoes and carrots, simple but well prepared. They ate at the rough wooden table, and Clara thought it was one of the best meals she had ever had, not because of the food itself, but because of the company. After dinner, Thomas showed her around the property. The barn was impressive, well built and organized. The horses were clearly well cared for, their coats gleaming and their eyes bright and curious. Thomas introduced her to each one by name, telling her their quirks and personalities. It was clear these animals were more than just livestock to him. They were companions in his solitary life. "This is Apache," he said, stopping at a stall that held a magnificent black stallion. "He was wild, caught about 3 years ago. Meanest horse I have ever tried to train. He put me in the dirt more times than I can count." But Nathan refused to give up on him, spent hours and hours just talking to the animal, gentling him bit by bit. By the time Nathan died, Apache would eat out of his hand. "He is beautiful," Clara said, admiring the horse's proud bearing. "He is the foundation of my breeding program now. His colts are smart and tough, exactly what people need out here." Thomas rubbed the stallion's nose affectionately. "Sometimes I think he is the only one who really understands what it was like to lose Nathan. He grieved too in his way, would not eat for days." Clara reached out and touched Thomas's arm gently. "You miss him terribly." "Every day. He was not just my brother, he was my best friend, my partner in all this. There are times when something happens, something funny or interesting, and I turn to tell him about it before I remember he is not there." Thomas looked down at her hand on his arm, then covered it with his own. "But lately, these past few days since I met you, it has hurt a little less. The loneliness is not quite so sharp." "I feel the same," Clara admitted. "Like maybe I am allowed to be happy again." They stood there in the barn, hands linked, while the horses moved quietly in their stalls and dust motes danced in the afternoon light streaming through the open doors. Clara felt something shift between them, deepening from the tentative connection of their first meetings into something stronger, more certain. Thomas lifted his free hand to her face, his calloused fingers gentle against her cheek. "Clara, I know we have not known each other long. I know I am just a rough rancher with dirt under my fingernails and no social graces. But I need you to know that meeting you has changed something in me. For the first time in 2 years, I am thinking about the future instead of just getting through the day." "Thomas," she whispered. He leaned down slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. But Clara did not want to pull away. She wanted him, with a fierceness that surprised her. When his lips met hers, it felt like coming home after a long journey. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but it quickly deepened into something that spoke of loneliness ended and hope renewed. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Thomas rested his forehead against hers. "I am sorry if that was too forward." "Do not be sorry," Clara said firmly. "I am not." They spent the rest of the afternoon talking, sitting on the porch of the house and watching the sun arc across the sky. Thomas told her his dreams for the ranch, how he wanted to expand the horse breeding operation, maybe build a bigger house someday. Clara told him about her own dreams, most of which she had thought long dead. Teaching, perhaps, if the town ever got a proper school, having a garden like her mother's. Building a life that was more than just surviving. "You could have all that here," Thomas said quietly, "if you wanted. I know it is too soon to speak of such things properly, but Clara, I need you to know my intentions are serious. I am not looking for a passing fancy or a casual courtship. I am looking for a partner, someone to build a life with." Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. "I need to know something first. Are you offering this because you are lonely or because you truly care for me? I will not be a convenience, Thomas. I have been overlooked and dismissed too many times in my life. If I give my heart, I need to know it will be treasured." Thomas took both her hands in his expression absolutely serious. "Clara Owens, I am lonely, that is true. But I have been lonely for 2 years, and in all that time, I never once thought about trying to change it. I was content to live out my days alone, working this ranch until my body gave out. Then I saw you, and something woke up inside me that I thought had died with my brother. You are not a convenience, you are a miracle." Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she was smiling. "I care for you too, more than I thought possible in such a short time. It terrifies me." "Me too," Thomas admitted. "I keep thinking I should slow down, be sensible, court you properly for at least a few months. But Clara, I am 33 years old. I have lived hard and I know life is uncertain. I do not want to waste time being cautious when I could be building a life with you." "What are you saying?" "I am saying that I would like to court you, properly and publicly, so everyone in Calico knows my intentions. And then, when a respectable amount of time has passed and you are absolutely certain of your feelings, I would like to ask you to marry me." He paused. "Unless you think that is too fast, in which case I will wait as long as you need." Clara thought about her life over the past year. The loneliness, the hard work for little pay, the feeling of being adrift with no anchor. She thought about Thomas's ranch, the home he had built with his own hands, the gentleness he showed his animals, the way he listened when she talked. She thought about the future they could build together. "I think," she said slowly, "that when you know something is right, you know it. My parents met at a church social and were married 6 weeks later. They had 30 years of happiness together. My grandmother told my grandfather she would marry him the first day they met, and they were together for 50 years. Sometimes caution is just another word for fear." "So you are saying yes. To courting, I mean." "I am saying yes to courting. And I am saying that I do not think I will need very long to be certain of my feelings." Thomas swept her into his arms, spinning her around with a whoop of joy that startled the horses in the nearby corral. When he set her down, they were both laughing, and he kissed her again with such enthusiasm that Clara's hat fell off. The ride back to town, as the sun was setting, felt entirely different from the morning's journey out. They rode close together, hands linked between their horses, talking and laughing. When they reached the boarding house, Thomas helped her dismount and walked her to the door. "When can I see you again?" he asked. "I have Wednesday afternoon free again," Clara said. "That is 3 days away." "I know. Could I come by tomorrow evening after you finish work, just to sit on the porch and talk for a while?" Clara smiled. "I would like that." Mrs. Henderson, who had undoubtedly been watching from the window, opened the door before Clara could reach for the handle. "Mr. Thorne," she said with exaggerated formality. "I trust Clara had a pleasant time." "Very pleasant, madam. I was hoping I might have your permission to call on her regularly. My intentions are entirely honorable." "I should hope so, Mrs. Henderson said sternly, but Clara could see the twinkle in her eye. "Clara is a good girl who deserves to be treated with respect." "Yes, madam, you have my word." "Then you are welcome to call, but not too late in the evenings. I run a respectable establishment." "Of course, madam." After Thomas left, Mrs. Henderson turned to Clara with undisguised delight. "Well, girl, you certainly made an impression. That man is smitten." "I think I am smitten too," Clara admitted. "It is about time. Now come inside and tell me everything." The next few weeks passed in a blur of happiness Clara had never experienced before. Thomas came to town almost every day, timing his visits around Clara's work schedule. Sometimes they just sat on the porch and talked. Other times they walked through town, Thomas's presence beside her making Clara feel safe and valued in a way she had not felt in years. The people of Calico began to take notice. At first there were whispers, speculation about the rough rancher courting the boarding house girl. But Thomas faced down the gossips with quiet dignity, always treating Clara with such obvious respect and affection that even the most skeptical began to approve. On Sundays, Thomas started attending church regularly, sitting beside Clara in the pew. Afterward, they would have dinner at the ranch or picnic by the creek. Clara began to learn the rhythms of ranch life, helping Thomas with small tasks and learning about the horses. She had a natural way with the animals, and Thomas delighted in teaching her the finer points of training and breeding. "You are good at this," he said one afternoon as she successfully worked a young mare through a series of exercises. "Better than I was when I started. I had horses growing up, remember? My father used to say I could gentle the meanest mule with nothing but patience and soft words." Your father was right. As summer deepened into fall, their relationship deepened as well. They talked about everything, sharing dreams and fears and memories. Thomas told Clara about his childhood in Texas, the poverty and his father's drinking. Clara told him about the scandal with her sister, the pain of losing her parents, the loneliness of starting over in a new place. "You ever think about finding your sister?" Thomas asked one evening as they sat on his porch watching the sunset. Clara was quiet for a moment. "Sometimes. But I do not even know where she is. Last I heard, she and Jacob Miller had gone to San Francisco, but that was over a year ago. She never wrote, never tried to contact me. I think she wanted to leave her old life behind completely, and that included me. That must hurt. It did at first. But now I think maybe it was for the best. I was so caught up in other people's choices, other people's mistakes. Coming here, starting fresh, it gave me a chance to figure out who I am on my own terms." She leaned against his shoulder, "And it brought me to you." "I am grateful for that," Thomas said, wrapping his arm around her. "Even if the path that brought you here was painful." In late October, with the desert beginning to cool from the brutal summer heat, Thomas rode into town on a Wednesday morning, earlier than usual. Clara was sweeping the porch when he arrived, and her heart leapt at the sight of him. "You are early," she said, smiling. "I could not wait." He dismounted and pulled a small box from his pocket. "Clara, I know we have only been courting for 2 months. I know conventional wisdom says I should wait longer. But I also know that I love you, and I know I want to spend the rest of my life with you. So I am asking you now, in front of God and Mrs. Henderson, who I know is watching from the window, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of value she ever owned. Nathan and I kept it all these years, thinking someday one of us might have a use for it. I think she would be happy knowing it is going to you." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, Thomas, I will marry you." He slipped the ring on her finger and it fit perfectly. Then he kissed her right there on the porch, propriety be damned. The door flew open and Mrs. Henderson burst out, followed by several of the other boarders who had apparently been watching as well. "It is about time," Mrs. Henderson declared, pulling Clara into a fierce hug. "I was beginning to think the man would never get around to asking." "We have only been courting 2 months," Clara protested, laughing through her tears. "When you are my age, you learn that life is too short to waste time," the older woman said. "Besides, any fool can see you two are meant for each other. Now, when is the wedding?" Thomas and Clara looked at each other. "Soon," Thomas said. "If Clara is agreeable, I see no point in a long engagement." "Neither do I," Clara agreed. "Before winter sets in, perfect. That gives us about 6 weeks. Those 6 weeks were a whirlwind of preparation." Clara continued working at the boarding house, but every spare moment was spent getting ready for her new life. Mrs. Henderson helped her sew a wedding dress from fabric Thomas bought at the general store, a beautiful cream-colored silk that must have cost him dearly. The other women in town, who had initially been skeptical of Clara, warmed to her once they saw how happy she and Thomas were together. Thomas, meanwhile, threw himself into preparing the ranch. He repaired the house from top to bottom, replacing worn floorboards and fixing the leaky spots in the roof. He built new furniture for the bedroom, including a beautiful bed frame made from pine he hauled down from the mountains. He even attempted to make curtains, though Clara had to redo them when she saw his efforts. "I am better with horses than needlework," he admitted sheepishly. "That is fine," Clara assured him. "I am better with needlework than horses, though you have been teaching me. We balance each other." They were married on the first Saturday in December, in the same schoolhouse where they had first met. Nearly the entire town turned out for the ceremony, curious to see the lonely rancher marry the boarding-house girl. The local minister, a kind man named Reverend Walsh, performed the service with warmth and humor. Clara walked down the aisle with Mrs. Henderson as her witness, having no family of her own to give her away. But when she saw Thomas waiting at the front of the room, tall and handsome in his Sunday best, his eyes shining with love, she did not feel the lack. This was her family now. This man who had appeared in her life when she had given up hope, who had seen something worth cherishing in a woman the world had overlooked. "Dearly beloved," Reverend Walsh began, and Clara felt her heart swell with joy. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. They exchanged vows and rings, Thomas's voice steady and sure, Clara's trembling slightly with emotion. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Thomas kissed her with such tenderness that several of the women in attendance sighed audibly. The reception that followed was a modest affair held in the schoolhouse, with food contributed by various townspeople and music, provided by the same fiddle player who had been at the dance months earlier. Clara danced with her new husband, swaying to the music and marveling at how much her life had changed in such a short time. "Happy," Thomas murmured in her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Clara replied honestly. They stayed until sunset, then rode out to the ranch together, Clara riding behind Thomas on his horse, her arms wrapped around his waist and her head resting against his back. The winter stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and a cool wind whispered through the desert sage. When they arrived at the ranch, Thomas carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing at the tradition. Inside, he had lit the fire, and the house glowed with warmth and welcome. Clara looked around at what was now her home and felt a sense of rightness settle over her. "Welcome home, Mrs. Thorne," Thomas said softly. "It is good to be home, Mr. Thorne." That first year of marriage was not without its challenges. The ranch demanded hard work from both of them, dawn to dusk and sometimes beyond. There were cattle to tend, horses to train, repairs to make, supplies to be bought. Clara learned to cook for a working man, to mend clothes that were perpetually torn and dusty, to keep a house that was constantly tracked through with mud and manure. But there were joys too, more than Clara had ever dreamed possible. Waking up beside Thomas every morning, his arm draped over her waist. Working together to break a particularly stubborn horse, celebrating when it finally responded to their patience. Sunday dinners together, just the two of them, talking about their week and their plans for the future. And the nights, oh the nights, when they would lie together in the darkness and Thomas would tell her how much he loved her, how grateful he was that she had said yes. In the spring, Clara discovered she was pregnant. She told Thomas one evening after dinner, nervous about his reaction. They had not really discussed children, though she had assumed he would want them eventually. His face went through a series of expressions: shock, joy, fear, and finally settling on a fierce protectiveness that made Clara's heart melt. "Are you sure?" he asked. "As sure as I can be. I have been sick in the mornings for the past 2 weeks, and I am late with my monthly courses. Mrs. Henderson says those are the signs." Thomas pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy, Clara, I am terrified and thrilled all at once. I never thought I would be a father. I never thought I would have this kind of life." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "You have given me everything. A home, a family, a reason to build something that will last beyond my own lifetime." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Clara continued to help around the ranch as much as she could, though Thomas became increasingly protective as her belly grew. In early October, on a crisp autumn morning, Clara went into labor. Thomas rode to town at breakneck speed to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Santos, who had delivered half the babies in Calico. Then he paced the front room while Clara labored in the bedroom, Mrs. Santos and Mrs. Henderson, who had insisted on being present, attending to her. The labor was long and difficult, lasting well into the night. Thomas could hear Clara's cries of pain through the bedroom door, and each one felt like a knife to his heart. He had faced down wild horses, survived rattlesnake country, endured the hardships of frontier life without flinching. But listening to his wife suffer and being unable to help was the hardest thing he had ever done. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a new sound, the thin, angry wail of a newborn baby. The bedroom door opened and Mrs. Henderson emerged, exhausted but smiling. "You have a son," she announced. "A big, healthy boy, and Clara did wonderfully. She is tired, but she is fine." Thomas sagged with relief, then rushed into the bedroom. Clara lay in the bed, pale and exhausted, her hair damp with sweat. But she was smiling, and in her arms she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a clean white cloth. "Thomas," she said softly, "come meet your son." He approached almost reverently, looking down at the tiny face peeking out from the wrappings. The baby had stopped crying and was looking around with unfocused dark eyes. His little fists waved in the air, and Thomas was struck by how impossibly small and perfect he was. "He is beautiful," Thomas breathed. "You are amazing, Clara. You did this." "We did this," Clara corrected. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son, Thomas knew exactly what he wanted to call him. "Nathan," he said. "If that is all right with you, after my brother, I would like his name to continue." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Nathan Thorne, I love it. Your brother would be honored." Thomas sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and Clara placed the baby in his arms. He held his son for the first time, marveling at the weight of him, the warmth, the absolute trust in that tiny sleeping face. Something fierce and primal stirred in his chest, a determination to protect and provide that went beyond anything he had felt before. "I promise you," he whispered to the baby, "I will give you the life I never had. You will grow up knowing you are loved and wanted. You will have a home that is stable and safe. And you will know your Uncle Nathan through the stories we tell and the ranch we built together." Little Nathan grew quickly, a robust baby who rarely cried and slept well. Clara took to motherhood with the same quiet competence she brought to everything else, though she admitted to Thomas in private that she was often terrified she was doing everything wrong. "You are doing perfectly," he assured her. "Look at him. He is healthy and happy. What more could we want?" The ranch prospered as well. Thomas's reputation as a horse breeder grew, and he had more orders than he could fill. He hired help, a young man named Sam Davis who had come west looking for work and proved to have a natural way with animals. With Sam's help, Thomas was able to expand the operation while still having time to spend with his growing family. When Nathan was 2 years old, Clara became pregnant again. This time she carried the baby with more confidence, knowing what to expect. In the summer of 1887, she gave birth to a daughter, a tiny thing with Clara's dark hair and Thomas's eyes. They named her Rose after Clara's mother. Life settled into a rhythm that was sometimes exhausting but always fulfilling. Thomas and Clara worked the ranch together, raised their children, and built a life that was richer than either had ever imagined possible. The rough house that Thomas had been embarrassed to show Clara that first Sunday was transformed into a real home, with curtains at the windows, rugs on the floors, and the sound of children's laughter echoing through the rooms. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Clara back to the creek where they had their first picnic. Sam agreed to watch the children for the afternoon, giving them a rare few hours alone together. They spread a blanket under the same trees, and Clara laughed at how much things had changed since that first nervous afternoon. "I was so worried I would say something stupid and you would never want to see me again," she admitted. "I was worried you would realize what a rough, uneducated rancher I was and run back to town," Thomas countered. He pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Instead, you saw something worth loving. You built a life with me. You gave me children and a home and a reason to care about tomorrow." "You gave me all those things too," Clara said softly. "When I met you, I thought my life was essentially over. I thought I would spend my remaining years scrubbing floors and sleeping in other people's houses, alone and unwanted. You showed me I could have more, that I deserved more." "You deserve everything," Thomas said fiercely. "And I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have it." They made love there under the cottonwood trees, the creek providing a gentle soundtrack, the desert sun warm on their skin. Afterward, they lay tangled together on the blanket, content and at peace. "I have been thinking," Clara said, tracing patterns on Thomas's chest. "The town is growing. They are talking about building a real school, not just using the schoolhouse for occasional lessons. They will need a teacher." "You would be perfect for that," Thomas said. "You should apply." "What about the children? And the ranch?" "Sam is capable of handling more responsibility, and Nathan is old enough for school himself. Rose could come with you until she is old enough to attend." "We will make it work, Clara, if it is something you want." Clara smiled, kissing him. "Have I told you lately that I love you?" "Not in the past hour. I was starting to worry." She laughed and swatted his chest playfully. "I love you, Thomas Thorne. More than I ever thought it was possible to love someone. And I love you, Clara Thorne. Thank you for being the last woman at that dance. Thank you for saying yes when I asked for that one." Years passed, and the Thorne family grew and flourished. Clara did become the teacher at Calico's new school, beloved by her students and respected by the community. Thomas expanded the ranch until it was one of the most successful operations in the region. Nathan and Rose grew into fine young people, learning the values of hard work and compassion from their parents' example. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas surprised Clara by building an addition to the house, giving them a proper parlor and a bigger kitchen. "I promised you I would fix this place up someday," he said as he showed her the completed work. "Make it more than just a rough rancher's shack." Clara walked through the new rooms, tears streaming down her face. "It is perfect. But Thomas, you did not have to do all this." "I have been happy here since the day we married." "I know. But I wanted to do it anyway. You have given me 10 years of happiness, Clara. The least I can do is give you a house worthy of the home you have made." They celebrated that night with a party, inviting all their friends and neighbors. The house was full of music and laughter, children running through the rooms, adults swapping stories and enjoying Mrs. Santos's excellent cooking. Clara stood on the new porch, watching the festivities, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the life she had built. Mrs. Henderson, now in her 60s but still spry, came to stand beside her. "You have done well for yourself, girl," she said, patting Clara's arm. "I knew that night you came back from the dance with stars in your eyes that something special was beginning." "Thank you," Clara said, hugging the older woman, "for pushing me to go to that dance, for supporting me when Thomas started courting, for being the closest thing to a mother I have had since I lost my own. It has been my pleasure, dear. You were the daughter I never had." As the party wound down and the guests began to leave, Clara and Thomas stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over the desert landscape they both loved. Their children were inside, being supervised by Sam's wife Mary, whom he had married the previous year. "You ever regret it?" Thomas asked quietly. "Saying yes so quickly, marrying a man you barely knew, giving up the possibility of a different life." Clara turned to look at her husband. The years had added silver to his dark hair and deeper lines to his face, but he was still the man who had nervously asked her for a dance that was already over. Still, the man who had seen something worth cherishing in a lonely woman standing by a punch bowl. "Not for a single second," she said firmly. "You are my great adventure, Thomas. You and this ranch and our children and this life we have built. It is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Good," he said, pulling her close, "because I plan to keep you for at least another 50 years. "Only 50, Clara teased. "Well, maybe 60. We will see how it goes." They stood there as the stars began to appear, the same stars that had shone down on them that first night when Thomas had walked her home from the dance. Clara thought about that young woman she had been, convinced her life held nothing but loneliness and hard work. If she could go back and tell her younger self that happiness was just around the corner, waiting in the form of a shy rancher who would love her beyond measure, she wondered if that Clara would have believed it. Probably not. But that was all right. Some things had to be experienced to be believed. More years passed, bringing both joys and sorrows. Clara's beloved Mrs. Henderson passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 70, leaving the boarding house to Clara in her will. Thomas and Clara decided to keep it running, hiring a manager and using the income to fund scholarships for children who wanted to attend school, but whose families could not afford supplies. Nathan grew into a fine young man, tall and strong like his father, with a gift for working with horses that surpassed even Thomas's considerable skill. At 20, he married a sweet girl named Emma Crawford, daughter of one of the mining foremen, and they built a house on the northern edge of the ranch property. Rose proved to have her mother's love of learning and her father's determination. She became a teacher like Clara, taking over the younger grades when Clara moved to teaching the older students. At 18, she became engaged to a young lawyer who had recently moved to Calico to set up practice. As Thomas and Clara entered their 50s, the ranch employed 6 full-time workers and had become one of the premier horse breeding operations in California. Thomas still worked alongside his men every day, though Clara noticed he moved a bit slower and seemed to tire more easily. She worried about him, but he brushed off her concerns. "I am fine," he insisted. "Just getting older like everyone does." One evening in the spring of 1898, 15 years after their marriage, Thomas came in from the barn looking unusually pale. Clara was preparing dinner, and she immediately knew something was wrong. "Thomas, what is it?" "Just a bit short of breath," he said, sitting heavily in his chair. "I am sure it is nothing." But it was not nothing. Over the next few weeks, Thomas's breathing problems worsened. The doctor, when finally consulted, diagnosed a weak heart, likely damaged by years of hard physical labor and the stress of frontier life. He prescribed rest and limited activity, which Thomas followed reluctantly and imperfectly. Clara cut back her teaching hours to spend more time at home, helping to run the ranch and making sure Thomas did not overexert himself. Nathan took over more of the day-to-day operations, proving himself more than capable. But it was hard for Thomas to step back from the work that had defined his life. "I feel useless," he admitted to Clara one night as they lay in bed. "Like I am just taking up space." "You are recovering," Clara said firmly. "And even if you never do another day's work on this ranch, you would not be useless. You built this place, Thomas. You created something that will last for generations. Nathan and his children will carry on what you started. That is worth far more than any amount of daily labor." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "I just wanted to give you more time. We should have decades left together." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she kept her voice steady. "We will have as much time as we are given, and whatever time that is, I will treasure every moment." "You are the love of my life, Thomas Thorne. You gave a lonely woman hope when she had none. You built a home and a family and a legacy. That is more than most people ever achieve." "I love you," he whispered. "I have loved you since that first night when you were the last woman at the dance and I asked for that one. Best decision I ever made. Mine too." Against the odds and the doctor's grim predictions, Thomas improved. He never regained his full strength, but with careful management and Clara's watchful care, he was able to continue living a relatively normal life. He could not do the heavy ranch work anymore, but he could train horses, manage the business side of things, and spend time with his growing family. Nathan and Emma had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, who adored their grandfather. Thomas spent hours with them, teaching them about horses and ranching, passing on the knowledge he and his brother had accumulated over decades of hard work. Rose married her lawyer, and they settled in Calico, giving Clara and Thomas 2 more grandchildren to dote on their 20th wedding anniversary. The family threw a huge celebration. Nearly 100 people attended, testament to the life Thomas and Clara had built and the respect they had earned in the community. Clara wore a new dress in the same shade of blue as the one she had worn to that first dance, and Thomas wore his best suit, his silver hair neatly combed. They danced together to the same fiddle player, now elderly himself, but still able to coax sweet music from his instrument. As they swayed to the music, Clara rested her head on Thomas's shoulder and felt perfectly content. "You remember what you said to me that night?" she asked softly. "When you found me standing alone in the schoolhouse, I said, 'May I have this one?'" Thomas replied. "And you said the dance was over. But you asked anyway. Best risk I ever took. I am so glad you did. I am so glad you worked up the courage to come through that door." "Me too, sweetheart, me too." The years continued to roll by, bringing the changes that time always brings. The turn of the century came and went, ushering in a new era. Calico began to decline as the silver ran out, but the Thorne Ranch remained prosperous, diversifying into cattle as well as horses. Thomas and Clara watched their grandchildren grow, saw their children's businesses and families thrive. In 1903, on a warm spring afternoon very much like the one where they had shared their first picnic, Clara and Thomas rode out to the creek together. It was harder now than it had been 20 years earlier. Thomas tired easily, and Clara had developed arthritis in her hands that made riding uncomfortable. But they were determined to visit the place where their love had truly begun. They spread a blanket under the cottonwood trees, which had grown taller and broader over the years, and sat together listening to the creek. Clara leaned against Thomas's shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, holding her close. "We have had a good life," Thomas said quietly. "The best," Clara agreed. "Any regrets?" She turned to look at him, taking in the face she knew as well as her own. The silver hair, the deep lines carved by time and sun, the eyes that still looked at her with the same love they had held that first night. "Not a single one. You. Only that I did not find you sooner. I would have liked 50 years with you instead of 20. We will have to settle for making the most of whatever time we have left. Deal?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the play of sunlight on the water. After a while, Thomas spoke again. "I want you to know something, Clara. When I am gone, Thomas, do not. No, listen. When I am gone, I want you to know that every day with you has been a gift. You took a broken, lonely man and gave him a reason to live. You gave me a home and a family and more happiness than I ever thought possible. Promise me you will remember that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I promise. But you have done the same for me. I was lost and alone, convinced I had no future worth having. You showed me I was wrong. You loved me when I thought no one ever would. That is a gift I can never repay. You repaid it every day just by being here, by choosing me, over and over, year after year." They stayed by the creek until the shadows grew long, holding each other and remembering all the years they had shared. When they finally rode back to the ranch, both knew without saying it that they would not return to this place. It was enough to have come one last time, to honor the beginning of their story. Thomas lived another 2 years, his heart gradually weakening despite Clara's devoted care. He passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cold January night in 1905, with Clara beside him and his children and grandchildren having said their goodbyes earlier in the day. He was 63 years old. Clara mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had learned strength from him, learned that even in grief, life goes on and there is still work to be done. She continued to teach, continued to help manage the ranch alongside Nathan, continued to be a central figure in her children and grandchildren's lives. On what would have been their 23rd wedding anniversary, Clara visited Thomas's grave in the small cemetery on the ranch property, next to the plot where Nathan Thorne, S.R., was buried. She sat on the ground beside the headstone, not caring that her dress would get dirty, and talked to him as she often did. "I miss you," she said softly, "every single day. The house feels empty without you, even though Rose and her family visit constantly and Nathan and Emma are just across the field. It is not the same without you." A warm breeze stirred the desert sage, carrying the scent of the land Thomas had loved. Clara took a deep breath and continued. "But I am all right. You made sure of that. You built something solid and lasting, and I am still here, still part of it. The grandchildren are growing so fast. Little Thomas, Nathan's youngest, is going to be just like you. He has that way with horses, that patience. Nathan is teaching him everything you taught him." She traced the letters of his name carved into the stone. "I wanted you to know that I kept my promise. I remember every day that you loved me. I remember how lucky we were to find each other, two lonely people who happened to be in the right place at the right time. I remember that you asked for one dance, and I gave you the rest of my life." Clara stayed there until the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Finally, she stood, her joints protesting the movement, and laid a hand on the headstone one last time. "I will see you again someday," she said. "But not yet. I still have work to do here. I will make you proud." Clara lived another 15 years, dying peacefully at the age of 77 in 1920. She had continued teaching until she was 70, had seen her grandchildren marry and have children of their own, had watched the ranch grow and prosper even as Calico itself became a ghost town. The silver long since played out. When she passed, The entire community mourned. Her funeral was attended by former students, their children and grandchildren, fellow ranchers, business associates, and family. They laid her to rest beside Thomas, their headstones side by side facing east toward the sunrise. Nathan Thorne, Jr., now a man in his late 40s with silver beginning to show in his dark hair, stood at his mother's grave with his own children and grandchildren around him. He thought about the stories his parents had told him over the years, about a lonely rancher and a woman who was the last at a dance, about a single moment of courage that had changed two lives forever. "Thank you," he said softly, speaking to both his parents, though only their silence answered. "Thank you for showing me what love looks like, what it means to build something that lasts. I will make sure your story is told, that your grandchildren and great-grandchildren know where they came from." The Thorne Ranch continued for generations, passed down through the family, expanding and contracting with the times but never disappearing entirely. And always, the story was told of how it began, how a shy rancher worked up the courage to walk into a dance after everyone else had gone home, how he saw a woman standing alone and asked for one dance, just one, how that single moment of bravery created a love story that would echo through the generations. In the late afternoon sunlight, the wind whispered through the desert sage around Clara and Thomas's graves, carrying the scent of the land they had loved and the home they had built. Their story was complete, their legacy secure, their love proven not just by words but by the lives they had created and the family that would carry on long after they were gone. It had all started with a simple question: "May I have this one?" And from that question had come everything worth having. A love that transcended loneliness, a partnership built on mutual respect and affection, a family that would span generations, and a home that would shelter and nurture countless lives. The last woman at the dance had said yes to the lonely rancher, and together they had built something beautiful and lasting. It was, in the end, the best kind of love story, the kind that was real,